There is something quietly fascinating about truly magnetic people. You've met them before, maybe at a gathering, maybe at work, maybe in the most ordinary place like a cafe or a waiting room. They walk in, and without saying much, the atmosphere seems to shift. Heads turn, conversations open, people lean in. Yet, if you watch closely, they're not performing. They're not competing. They're not desperately trying to be noticed. And that's the surprising part. Magnetic people are rarely the ones hustling for attention. They are not the loudest voice in the room. They don't overextend themselves to win approval. They don't twist themselves into shapes just to be liked. What they do is far more subtle. So subtle that most people never consciously notice it. Tiny adjustments, small behaviors, almost invisible habits that completely change how others feel around them. What's even more interesting is that magnetism is not some mystical personality trait you either have or don't have. It's not something reserved for extroverts, natural talkers, or born performers. It can be learned. It can be practiced. It can be built gently and deliberately. And if you had met me years ago, Sophia, you might never have believed that, because I was the opposite of magnetic. Growing up, I was painfully shy. Not the cute, quiet type, but the kind of shy that feels like a constant knot in your chest. I dreaded being called on in class. I avoided speaking in groups. I rehearsed sentences in my head before saying them, only to stay silent anyway. My world often felt like something to hide from rather than step into. People would say things like, "You're so quiet," as if it were an innocent observation. But inside, it didn't feel innocent. It felt like exposure, like being seen for what I feared most, that I wasn't interesting enough, confident enough, or bold enough to take up space. I was deeply afraid of judgment, afraid of scrutiny, afraid of that invisible spotlight I imagined was always waiting to catch my mistakes. Fast forward to today, and the contrast almost feels surreal. Now, I genuinely enjoy walking into rooms full of strangers. I love conversations. I love connecting with new people. Speaking in front of others no longer feels like an ordeal. It often feels like play, like curiosity, like discovery. The anxiety that once dominated my social experiences has largely been replaced by a sense of ease. But here's the key truth. This transformation did not come from becoming a different person. It came from practicing a handful of small, specific habits. No dramatic reinvention, no personality transplant, just tiny shifts that gradually changed both how others responded to me and how I experienced myself. Let's talk about the first one, a habit so small it almost sounds trivial, yet powerful enough to alter the emotional tone of an interaction. The 2-second eye contact rule. Eye contact is one of the most primal forms of human communication. Long before we analyze words, we read presence, we read attention, we read intention. Research consistently shows that people who maintain eye contact a healthy percentage of the time are perceived as more confident, more trustworthy, and more likable. But the magic lies in a microscopic tweak. When greeting someone or listening to them, hold their gaze just 2 seconds longer than feels instinctively comfortable. 2 seconds. Not a stare, not an intense, unblinking lock, just a gentle extension of presence. A silent signal that says, "I see you, I'm here with you." This tiny adjustment works because most people are accustomed to fractured attention. Glances that dart away, eyes that flicker to phones, minds that seem half-occupied. Sustained eye contact, even briefly, communicates something rare, genuine engagement. I once experimented with this while doing something utterly mundane, ordering coffee. I simply held eye contact with the barista for a fraction longer than usual. The response was immediate. A warmer smile, a softer tone, a subtle but unmistakable shift in energy. Nothing else changed. Same words, same transaction. But the interaction felt more human. During my years in medicine, I saw this effect repeatedly with patients. When I sat down, met their eyes, and lingered for just a moment longer, their entire posture often softened. Shoulders relaxed, voices steadied. It was as though being fully seen gave them permission to exhale. 2 seconds can do that, because attention is one of the most valuable psychological gifts we can offer another person. Yet, eye contact alone is only part of the story. Before you even speak or look at someone, your body has already begun telling a narrative about you. Which leads to the second habit, the open posture reset. Most of us underestimate how loudly our bodies speak. Posture, stance, and physical orientation constantly broadcast emotional signals. Closed posture, folded arms, rounded shoulders, contracted stance, often conveys defensiveness, discomfort, or withdrawal, even when unintended. Magnetic individuals tend to display the opposite quality: expansion without arrogance, presence without force. Instead of folding inward, they subtly open outward, shoulders relaxed, arms uncrossed, torso oriented toward others. The body quietly declaring, "I belong here. I'm available for connection." This isn't about exaggeration or theatrical confidence. It's about removing the unconscious signals of self-protection that create invisible barriers. I used to enter rooms trying to be as small as possible. Shoulders slightly hunched, arms crossed, energy pulled inward. Unsurprisingly, people responded in kind, politely distant, minimally engaged. Everything began to change when I practiced a 1-second reset. Uncross the arms, roll the shoulders back, lift the head slightly, and physically angle toward the environment rather than away from it. I remember attending a large networking event where I knew absolutely no one. Instead of shrinking into a corner, I consciously adopted an open posture as I walked in. The difference was remarkable. Conversations emerged more naturally. People approached more readily. Interactions flowed with less friction. Your body doesn't just influence how others perceive you, it influences how you feel. Openness often generates a feedback loop. You look more at ease, others treat you as more at ease, and your internal state gradually aligns with that external reality. But magnetism is not only about how you carry yourself. It is also deeply tied to how you make others feel. Which brings us to habit number 3, the name echo. Few things capture human attention as reliably as hearing one's own name. Neuroscience suggests that our names carry unique cognitive significance. They activate recognition pathways linked to identity and social relevance. Used thoughtfully, a person's name becomes a bridge, a small but powerful acknowledgement of their individuality. The practice is simple. When meeting someone new, use their name naturally a few times, once at greeting, once during the conversation, and once when parting. Not mechanically, not excessively, just enough to anchor the interaction in personal recognition. This habit has 2 surprising benefits. First, it makes the other person feel seen and valued. Second, it dramatically improves your own ability to remember names, a common social anxiety point for many people. By actively using a name, you reinforce it neurologically. I've watched entire conversations soften when someone hears their name spoken with warmth and ease. It subtly transforms the exchange from generic to personal. Of course, balance matters. Overuse can feel artificial or even unsettling. But when woven lightly into dialogue, the effect is quietly powerful. Yet, even with eye contact, posture, and names, there is another factor that shapes how others experience you: your pacing, your rhythm, your relationship with silence. The micropause. Nervous energy often manifests as rushed speech. Words tumble out, sentences overlap, silences are hurriedly filled. Ironically, this urgency can undermine perceived confidence. Calm communicators do something different. They pause. They allow space between thoughts. They let statements settle. They breathe before responding. Even brief pauses tend to increase perceptions of thoughtfulness, authority, and composure. Silence, rather than signaling insecurity, becomes a tool of presence. I first internalized this lesson in high-pressure professional settings. Faced with challenging questions, the instinct to respond immediately was strong, but deliberately pausing, even for a single breath, created clarity, steadiness, and unexpectedly, stronger impressions of confidence. A pause communicates that you are not scrambling to prove yourself. You are grounded enough to think, to consider, to choose your words. Confidence is rarely about speed. Often, it is about comfort with stillness. Finally, we arrive at perhaps the most transformative habit of all, one that reshapes not only how others see you, but how conversations themselves unfold: the curiosity spark. Many people enter social interactions with a subtle but exhausting pressure. How do I appear interesting? Magnetic people often operate from a different orientation. How do I become genuinely interested? This shift is profound. When you ask thoughtful follow-up questions, not superficial inquiries, but sincere explorations, you create emotional engagement. People feel heard rather than evaluated. Conversations deepen rather than stagnate. Curiosity is disarming. It reduces social tension. It invites authenticity. Instead of defaulting to predictable small talk, lean slightly deeper. Ask what someone enjoys most about their work, what excites them lately, what they value, what they've learned. Not as an interrogation, but as an expression of genuine interest. Humans are wired to respond positively to feeling understood. And when you offer that experience, magnetism often emerges as a byproduct rather than a goal. The beautiful paradox is this: when you stop trying to be captivating and start being curious, you often become far more compelling. Because people remember how you made them feel: seen, heard, valued. These 5 habits: extended eye contact, open posture, name usage, intentional pauses, and genuine curiosity, are deceptively small. None require dramatic personality changes. None demand extroversion or theatrical charisma. Yet together, they reshape social energy in powerful ways. And perhaps the most encouraging truth, Sophia, is this: you do not need to transform into someone else to become magnetic. You simply refine how you show up. Tiny adjustments, gentle awareness, consistent practice. Magnetism is less about performance and more about presence, less about impressing and more about connecting, less about striving and more about allowing. If a once terrified, painfully shy child can grow into someone who genuinely enjoys rooms full of strangers, meaningful conversations, and spontaneous connections, then this capacity is far more accessible than most people imagine. Not magic, just mindful habits, and the willingness to practice them.